Hello, welcome to Built Environment Matters, a monthly podcast brought to you by Bryden, an international company of technologists, designers, architects, engineers and analysts working for a better built environment. Bryden believe in design to value, to cut carbon, drive efficiency, save time, make beautiful places and build a better future.
Hi, I'm Jamie Johnston, Head of Global Systems at Bryden, and welcome to episode 3 of our podcast, Built Environment Matters. This time I'm joined by John Dyson, former Vice President of Capital Strategy at pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline, and now Professor of Human Enterprise at the University of Birmingham in the UK. We're going to be talking about design to value in process engineering. We'll talk a bit about what that means in theory and then look at some of the practical real-world examples. Hi John, welcome.
Hi, good to speak to you today.
So first things first, John, what is process engineering?
Yeah, so process engineering it's an interesting subject to talk about because often people jump into the idea of the sort of science of process engineering and chemical reactions and the sort of subjects that you study at university in university courses. But for me, process engineering is much wider than that. And it's about understanding the systems that create outcomes and purposes. So whenever there's a desired outcome, there's a process that needs to be gone through in order to achieve that outcome, and that means that things need to flow, that things need to come together, that things need to react together to happen. And understanding how that happens, that system that comes together to produce the outcome, is really important to make sure that we get the outcomes we require. And although process engineering is often focused towards things like manufacturing, where the output is clearly something like a product, it can be as equally applied to something that has a social outcome or a service outcome.
Yes, that's quite important, isn't it? So when I first encountered this term, I assumed it only referred to pharmaceuticals or car production, but actually, we apply process engineering much wider than that, don't we?
Yeah. So a hospital is a process. It's a process of bringing in patients, finding out what's wrong with them, carrying out tests, consulting, treatments, recovery. That's all part of a process for a patient to go through, and understanding that process helps you understand how to design a hospital, which of course, you know a lot about. But an airport is another process where you've got to take passengers through, you've got to, security check them, get their luggage and security check that and get them onto the plane. They're all processes as much as the sort of classical manufacturing processes of manufacturing goods, putting them in packaging, etc.
Absolutely. And why do you think process engineering is particularly important now in the current climate?
I think we're realizing that there's lots of challenges to tackle at the moment. The one that's right on top of us now is, of course, the COVID pandemic, and there's all sorts of outcomes we're trying to do there, whether it be tracking and testing people, whether it be creating vaccines and then ultimately distributing them, or other treatments. There's lots of processes that we're doing, but on top of all that, you've got things like the climate crisis and global warming, and lots of outcomes there. And there's a general understanding that unless you really go into and understand the processes that need to come together to make these things happen, you won't get the outcomes you require. And just leaving it to chance and leaving it to simple thinking, won't get us the results we want.
Yeah, that's quite right. So I'd like to come back to vaccines, particularly later, but maybe let's explore a bit more conceptually what we mean by process engineering. So Bryden would very often talk about design to value being our overarching principle. How does process engineering relate to design to value? Is it the same thing? Is it a part of design to value? How would you articulate it?
Yeah, I think they're very closely linked. So when I talked about process engineering, the first thing you're looking at is what the desired outcome is, the end point, and design to value looks at that in two ways. One of them is it looks at something called a problem statement. So what's the step change in performance we're looking for? What's the outcome we're looking for? What is the problem we're trying to crack? So if you take the pandemic, what the problem you're trying to crack at the moment, which is a difficult problem, is to allow people to go about their business, to allow the economy to grow and people to be employed, but also to protect life, and that's an outcome. That's the problem that you're trying to fix, and that's the starting point of process engineering, is understanding the problem that you're trying to crack. And the second, a really important part then is to look at value itself, and what you value about the outcome. And the thing about value is often people jump, when you use the term value, to economic value. So the cost of something, or the return on investment, or those sort of financial measurables. But value is much more than that, and it includes many other factors. There's a social value, the value of providing for a social need, things like democratization, allowing people access to products or services that they couldn't have them before. Of course, the environmental values, the impact you're having on the environment. And there's also value in things like aesthetics and how good things feel and work, and how comfortable people are in working in places or working through processes. And then on top of that, there's what can you gain? We often call it the value from doing. What can you gain from the process itself? Can people what can they learn? What can they be educated on? How can they personally develop? How can doing a particular project actually benefit the people who are neighbours to the project? So there's lots of value, and part of that is really understanding the value that you're going to go after when you're on design to value. And then comes the modelling and understanding of the processes which are going to deliver those value outcomes, and trying to find the optimum balance between them.
I think that's incredibly important and very pertinent at the moment. So I don't think it's coincidence. I mean, we've obviously been talking about design to value for a couple of years. The Construction Innovation Hub recently published the Value Toolkit, for instance. And my perception is that whilst I think the word value has been slightly debased in retail, where it's associated with kind of value brands and cheapest product, I think that's because retail's been doing this for a long time. They're sort of in the incremental gains phase, whereas construction's nowhere near that. And I think for a long time, we've been chasing capital cost, regardless of carbon outcomes or maybe societal outcomes. I think we've been pursuing one metric, and it's led us into some of the inefficiencies we're now seeing, some of the climate issues we're now facing. So I don't think it's coincidence that the conversation around value and broadening out the outcomes that we expect to get from projects is incredibly timely, and we really need to focus on it around this sort of for the next couple of decades at least.
And of course, you point to one of the reasons why it's difficult is because it to start with, it isn't straightforward. It isn't just about taking a specification and meeting a specification. It is about taking a broader view and really trying to understand, get under the skin of the client or the government or society, and understand what's really valuable there, and then trying to decide what the best thing is and what the best design is to achieve that. It's sort of much easier to just say, well, that's what you wanted, so that's what we did. And this process requires you to be braver and more innovative.
Yeah. So maybe a good way to bring it to life is to contrast it to, say, a normal design process, a normal sort of linear stage-by-stage design process, and explain what the differences are when you approach it in a different way.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite interesting. The first thing is, we talked about a brief a couple of times already. It's almost like seeing a brief as a hypothesis, a guess at what it is that's required, and it gives you some insight into the problem that's trying to be solved, and then it's about picking that apart. The best way I find of explaining it is to talk about one of the first projects that we used design to value on, for me, which really sort of brought home what it's all about. And it was a project for putting carbonated and soft drinks into Africa. And the business had decided that it wanted to build a new factory in a different part of Africa in order to manufacture some new products, and hopefully, because of the local manufacture, would grow the market. And this had been through a very traditional design process. So it'd gone out to a large engineering company. They'd spoken to the client about the project, and they came back and they came back with a £70 million factory. The only problem is that £70 million factory didn't have any return on investment. It just wasn't financially viable. And the immediate reaction, which often happens then, was you've got to make it cheaper. So, £70 million, far too expensive. Other people could build it cheaper. Go and find a way to build it cheaper. And in fact, we did do that process. So we looked at the overall size of the factory and optimized it, and we looked at the construction techniques and reduced the complexity of those. And ultimately, I think we took £17 million out of the capital cost, which was great, but it still didn't make financial sense. In parallel to that, we started to ask the question about the financial viability and why it wasn't financially viable. And we started to model the products that were going through it and the costs of those products, how much it cost to produce the energy that went into them, the raw materials, and how much it cost to build the particular part of the facility and the equipment to make each stage of the production. And from that, we found this really interesting fact that one of the main products that they were going to make in this new factory, which was bottled water, was actually going to be unprofitable because there was high energy costs and a low sale price for bottled water in Africa. And it was that product itself, not the whole factory and not the whole idea, that was actually making that an unviable investment. And in fact, because of that, it was decided not to do that project at all. That was a really interesting process for me. And it also brings to life one of the uncomfortable truths of this process is that you can conclude that not doing something is the most valuable thing.
Yeah, I want to talk about three topics around this. So one is questions, one is tools, and one is people. So on the questions one, yeah, you raise this point. One of our directors, Stephen Tilkin, used the phrase, which I always remember. He's saying everyone else is trying to answer the question, can we do this? And he's trying to ask the question, should we do this? And that's a really good example of that, where maybe we talk about opening up the solution space or the search space for ideas, that we don't become fixed too soon. We start to open up the problem before we get anywhere close to trying to solve the problem. We try and define really what the problem is. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good way to think about a project is that it has a problem space and a solution space, and if you look at traditional ways of working, people spend all their time in the solution space as if the problem is absolutely understood and set and very clear, and everybody knows what's required, and all that's required is a solution to meet that outcome. The more we worked in this area, the more we realized that actually coming up with the proper problem space and really understanding what the problem is to be fixed, and then from that, then looking at the particular solutions to do it, the better the outcome. And it's a bit frustrating sometimes because people just want you to get on, and rather than ask lots of questions. But as we've done this a number of times, you realise that there are some much better solutions out there than the ones that fall into people's minds. You know, we've looked at brand new training, multi-million pound training centres turned into 20 very cost-effective training hubs, which delivered much better training and at much lower cost to a company, rather than the first thought of this lovely shining training facility in Asia, just by really understanding what the end result was that they were looking for, and then picking at some of the ideas around that.
Yeah, so like so many of these things, it comes down to people, so I'm going to leave that one to last. But in terms of tools, I mean, you've mentioned modelling. We use, I think, quite a vast range of different tools and techniques, from data analytics, discrete event simulation. There's a whole range of digital techniques. Perhaps you can talk about some of those, and particularly chip thinking, which I describe as quite a sticky concept. Once clients have understood chip thinking, they really understand the power of how this is helping them think about projects.
Yeah, so I'll start talking about chip thinking because chip thinking came out of the idea that you wanted to be able to link different data sets together when you are modeling. So people do often do financial models, but that tends to sit in the finance department, and no one else can see what's going on. And then you have the engineers specifying equipment and designing things, but they do that in their engineering office. And then you have people who do understand the overall process and the logistics, but they are again separate from one another. Chip thinking is quite a simple methodology, but its huge power is it brings all parties together. And what it does really is look at a process from end to end. It can be a manufacturing process, or as we talked about before, it can be a people process like a hospital. And what you do then is you break that into spaces where key parts of value are added to the process. So that might be a manufacturing step in a factory, but it could be in an airport, the security check. That's the thing. And we call those chips. And basically, if you imagine then a process, what it is a strung together flow of those chips together. But the beauty of the chip is that physicalizes it as well. So it allows engineers to be designing in it while also generating data which finance people can use to generate things like cost of goods and so on. So it brings together the different perspectives, and it also allows people to have a look, and because you can digitally show these chips, and so people can see what's happening. They can see an early representation of what a factory, an airport, or a hospital might look like. If you combine that sort of tool with some of the other things you talked about, like discrete event modeling, which is detailed and dynamic process modeling. So where goods would move, how people would move on, how long it would take them to do each step. And then introducing things like natural variation into that gets you to really starting to understand how the process might work, and thus start to make some really good design decisions about how you can help those processes flow and achieve their outcomes better.
But it also allows you to test things very, very quickly. So we talk about rapid iteration, the idea you can model something in chip, see the outcome, go back, try another idea. So rather than do a sort of fixed 2 months of design, submit it to the client, get their comments back, we're iterating in days, hours. It's a much, much quicker, much more reactive process, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I mean, we had projects with 30 to 40 options in them, and that's not laborious, because the whole sort of structure of the chips allows you to. It's almost like a set of game cards. And once you've created them, you can put them down in different orders, and you can test out different scenarios, and the modeling can follow you. And so you can really start to home in on where the interesting places are. It's a bit like, and people say this, a bit like lighting up a cave, really, and looking for the gold in a cave. The more that you can light it, the more options, the more corners that you can look into, the more chance you have of finding gold.
Yeah. But then the implication of that, and it's the sort of people question, we started to recognise the speed of iteration was so fast that we almost had to have the client in the room. So that then started this culture of colo spaces, collaborative spaces, blended teams, physically working. So perhaps you can talk about, you talked about conceptually how chips sort of brought in people's thinking, but then we started to say, well, actually, let's physically get people co-working on the problem simultaneously, and that completely changed the dynamic between customer and designer, people's interaction with the project, people's engagement. So perhaps you can expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of processes are done at arm's length in design. So, we talked about brief and specifications, they're passed, and then someone responds to those in a tender, or responds to them in a written document, and that's consuming. But you miss the huge value of bringing people together who all have ideas and all have or good ideas, and if you can bring them together with their desires in it. If you can bring them together with their ideas and insights, you can find, really new and potentially, exciting possibilities. But that completely changes the dynamic. It means that what you've got to try and encourage is people to work together on sort of an equal power base. So it isn't client just telling the supplier what wants. It's about the client trying to explain what they're trying to achieve and what they know about their business at the moment, because they'll know a lot, and what they're very good at doing because they will have some core competencies, but also saying, yeah, but we don't know how to do this bit, and maybe you do, and you can bring your expertise to bear. And also explain there are things that neither of us at the moment need to know how to do. There's some bravery in this, because in past processes, there's sort of everyone pretends that they know everything. And that pretense is really dangerous because lots of assumptions are made. This process invites people to say, we want to do this, but we don't really know how to do it. But if we're really sure that if we work together, we'll find the best solution. So it requires that. I just wanted to say that we originally thought that being together physically was really important, and it was important for us to start with, because when you're trying to do something new, you need to step them outside of their normal workplace, because being in a corporate office makes you feel corporate and makes you do the corporate things, whereas being in a more interesting design office makes you feel more liberated and design focused. But what we've also found is you can do many of these things using tools and techniques and approaches remotely. And in fact, there's some benefits to the remoteness, because it gives people much more equal status, and equal status is key to this collaboration.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. One of the things I miss most about the office, so for listeners, we started moving GlaxoSmithKline people into the office. We gave them free space to work from one of our floors in the office, and we'd form these blended teams with us and Glaxo people and some of our competitors, even subject matter experts. And then other clients started saying, well, when do I get my space? And so we had one entire floor of the office was pure colo space, and it was a shifting cast of characters. It might be Ministry of Justice for a few months. It might be Landsec for a few months. It was sort of constantly changing, but that sort of dynamic feeling of people running into each other. I remember one of the things I used to do was if we had a potential new client, I would stop you in the corridor and get you to take them for coffee. That kind of serendipitous thing you can't create anymore. So yeah, as you say, there's benefits to working remotely, but I do miss the kind of buzz of seeing this in action on that floor. And as you say, I think one of the really interesting things of people not being able to tell who was a client, who was a designer, who was a subject matter expert, I thought that gave it a real kind of as you say, it kind of democratized the process. It kind of leveled the playing field, and everyone had almost an equal voice. So we're still working through that. But that was one of the most exciting things about the process, I always thought.
Yeah, and you mentioned buzz and excitement, and I think that is something we really noticed about doing design to value in this way. Is people really enjoyed it, and projects, can be really miserable places. And I've been in project management for a long time. I'm always dismayed about how miserable people in projects, they seem really hard. And actually, they're really exciting things are projects. You're trying to, make a step change in whatever you're working in. And if you're working in hospitals or technology or the environment, you're making step changes in those things. That should be an exciting place to work. And design to value, part of it is to capture that excitement, that, the possibility that we could do something special here every time. And that's why we started to use words like exquisite design, because we wanted to impart in people the excitement and the potential of bringing everyone's ideas and everyone's knowledge together and creating special outcomes that very different from what the normal processes would encourage people to do.
Yeah. And the outcomes are vast. The benefits are vast, aren't they? Can you talk about some of the projects? So maybe Palmer, Factory in a Box, some of the impacts this approach had on those projects.
Yeah. So the Palmer project was to make a drug called an attachment inhibitor, and in itself, that's a really valuable was a really valuable thing to do. The attachment inhibitor is a drug that treats people who are suffering from HIV, AIDS, and the other drugs are no longer working for them. So there's a small percentage of people on traditional treatments, which are much better these days, who no longer will their treatments be working for them. So they're facing quite a bleak future. And this drug has been found which can help a large number of those people. And GlaxoSmithKline wanted to get it to market as quickly as possible. It was in development. And this is an important point about design to value is it sort of loves it when things aren't clear. So when you're trying to accelerate a product to market, what you don't want to do is too early is to tie everything down, because you'll be wrong. During the development process, something will come out which is unexpected, and that will, if you're not careful, that will really impact your outcome. So you've got to be flexible and you've got to work closely together. So we worked very closely with GSK, the client, but also the local designer and construction companies. We fast-tracked the design process, but using chips allowed us to make sure that we created the space for the process while not completely understanding what it would be till later in the day. And also the modelling processes, the structural modelling in this case allowed us to simplify the building in order to make sure that we could hit a much quicker timescales. And that project, from I think feasibility to product coming out of the door, was about 18 months. Of course, the facility won an award from the ISPE as Facility of the Year.
Can you talk about maybe Factory in a Box? Because I think that was quite a interesting physical manifestation, and some of the benefits that came out of developing that DFMA solution.
Yeah, so Factory in a Box, people are fascinated because ultimately it was a pharmaceutical secondary factory that when we first tested it was built with Gurkhas, and it raised a lot of interest because of that story. But behind that was something really quite special. I mean, first of all, it was a problem for a large business about how it could build quickly, cost effectively, but also very high quality facilities in emerging markets where the local capability was very variable. So how might you do that? And secondly, as well, and talking about the value of through doing the project, is how could you use that investment directly to improve skills and build capability in the locations that you're building the factories. And from that problem came this idea that we could, using components which are largely readily available in the supply chain already, but bringing them together in a simple and clever way, we could produce factories using not people who had loads of experience in construction, but local competent people who weren't necessarily have any skills in construction, but just were competent, and you could meet all the quality requirements that were required. And we tested that using ex-Gurkha soldiers, because they weren't builders, they weren't in construction, but they were very competent people who could follow processes and procedures. And we proved that you could build a facility very quickly to the right level of quality. And after that, when it was put in place for the first time in anger in a real facility, actually it was in the UK, we also found that it was significantly more cost effective than building in traditional ways. And it took two people about 10 weeks to put a facility together, which is just sort of unheard of in construction, those sorts of small numbers. Fascinating project. And I think we learnt a huge amount about what you can do to take out a lot of the waste in the overall construction process in delivering that.
But it was, I love it as a case study. It was a phenomenal piece of work, but it demonstrated so many of these things. So as you talked about the kind of earlier, the outcomes, so the societal outcomes, we took a bunch of people, trained them up, demonstrated that you could diversify the construction workforce. It was a precursor to platforms, but a lot of the things we learned on that project obviously fed into the platforms thinking. But at the end of it was still a load cheaper. So by not necessarily focusing purely on cost, but looking at this broader value landscape, actually low cost kind of fell out of it, along with better quality and upskilling of people and all of these other things we learned. So I think it was a fantastic sort of demonstrator of how you can achieve low cost but also get a load of other benefits. I can't help thinking there must be a use for some of this learning in at least the healthcare projects are coming up, but also we're going to need to make a lot of vaccines. Perhaps you can talk about the vaccines modelling, which is the other piece that's very current and very pertinent around this topic. Yeah.
So of course, where we are today is that we're all avidly waiting for a vaccine, and there's 200 odd in development. And the difficulty is with them is that there are all different stages of development, different probabilities of success, and there are also different technologies in there requiring different manufacturing techniques and different logistics. So it's a really complicated field, and how can you be as ready as you can be for that? Well, our answer is you can start to model it. You can start to link in with the people who are understanding the development processes and their likelihood of success and those sorts of things, and those people at universities and so on working on that. And what we could do is link directly into that and start to look at the physicality of the supply chains for that. So what's likely to happen? What capacity do different countries have to make different vaccines, and what would that do to the overall global supply of vaccines? And by understanding that picture, you can start to potentially make some decisions about what you might put in place, which would overall increase your chances of responding quickly to a vaccine that came through, and being able to provide vaccines to the people that need them as quickly as possible. So a really interesting place. And you mentioned things like factory in a box. They're really useful because they're sort of standardized across. There are things that were standardized across the different processes. So all of them need hygienic spaces. So for instance, you could make sure that you have the hygienic components available to you without building, the wrong factories in the wrong places. You could have components there which you could deliver very quickly. So as soon as you start to model and understand, you can always start to see great opportunities, even in really uncertain times and outcomes, to be able to take steps to add value to the process.
So we could talk about this all day, couldn't we? But there's clearly a whole raft of benefits that come out of this. There's clearly a whole number of reasons to do this. Obviously, we've grown this ability. I think I started talking to you about this maybe 12 years ago, 13 years ago. This has been a sort of journey we've gone on. Do you think it's something that everyone can do? Do you think it requires a particular skill set or is a particular culture? What do you think stops this becoming, given it feels like it's a very needed thing in construction, what stops this being sort of much more widely scaled?
So anyone can do it. It's not magic. It's not a magic process. The issue comes is that, first of all, you have to break with the ideas and processes that you've been following before. And there's sort of some comfort and protection in taking a brief and doing what's asked of you and claiming variations and just carrying on. And lots of companies have worked out a mechanism of surviving and under that sort of process. So why would they change? There's a need for bravery and stepping out. And I said before that it's quite an interesting and risky place to be when a client comes in and says, I've got this idea, I'd like to do this, and you say, well, that's really interesting, but we don't think that's the right thing to do. That is potentially a risky conversation. So of course you don't have it quite so abruptly as that, but you go on a journey together. So you've got to have the courage, if you like, to do that. And I think the other thing you've got to have courage in is you're going to start to employ different people with different skill sets. You're going to have to embrace technologies and ideas that you haven't thought about or used before. You're going to have to, as an organisation, learn. You're going to have to maybe take some risks in who you recruit, because what you're doing is you need to expand the diversity of knowledge and understanding and technology in order to find new ideas. And all those things, particularly in industries where you're worried about profit margins and you're worried about business and you want to hold on to your current clients, are all difficult steps to take. So on one hand, it's really open to anybody to do. On the other hand, it's incredibly difficult to do, and it's a bit like Toyota. I mean, Toyota, have what are perceived as fantastically good lean manufacturing processes, and they open their doors to all their competitors to come in and have a look at them, and they do that in the knowledge that yes, you can understand how to do these things, you can understand the different processes and that you apply. However, you've got to have a completely different mindset to do them and a completely different set of ambitions for yourself as a company and for your people, etc. And unless you have that culture and ambition, then knowing the process steps isn't going to help you.
But it does feel like an idea whose time has come, maybe. So if you talk about bravery and risk, but if ever clients needed a way to deal with uncertainty, because who knows how long, the ramifications are going to cast on a very long shadow, aren't they? So if ever there's a time to have some way of dealing with uncertainty, but also I think every company has learned that they can deal with sudden shifts. No one expected to be running Barclays off kitchen tables, was the quote I read in the press, 8 months ago. So hopefully companies have recognised actually they can make fairly quick adaptations if they need to, and they probably need a different set of tools because the world isn't going to get any less uncertain anytime soon. So it does feel like it's the time maybe more people should start embracing some of these ways of thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was in GlaxoSmithKline, I just wanted people to do these things more and introduce the ideas to many companies. And although they, at one level, really excited about the prospect, they felt that the risks for them as a company were small. But you rightly raised that today people have understood that things are very uncertain. I mean, they always were. It's just that people get deluded into the idea that things are certain and they hold on to them. That if only we can we can carry on in this way. Everything will be okay. I really do hope that that people embrace the uncertainty. Actually, when we're forced to change, we can find much, much better ways of doing things. We often think doing things differently are going to be risky, but what we tend to find is that we find much better ways of doing things, opportunities that were always there for the taking, but we were always a bit too nervous to take them. And now more than any time, look, those risks have all ramped up anyway, so you might as well take the plunge and have a go. And that can only be to the good. If we can expand our minds and expand our ambition about what's achievable, there really is opportunity in the situation we're in.
So, as I say, we could talk about this all day, but I think that's a brilliant place to leave it. So, on that final point, expand your mind, expand your ambition. Thanks, John, for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much. Cheers, Jamie.
So join us next month. I'll be talking to Jamie Cresser-Brown, one of the directors from our creative technologies team, talking about residential and how we might use some digital tools to unlock the application of modern methods of construction to deliver the housing pipeline that we desperately need.
Thank you for listening to Built Environment Matters, a podcast brought to you by Bryden Wood. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your favourite podcast, and you can follow Bryden Wood on LinkedIn and Twitter.